Welcome to my Shliach Story Hour Chssidim series. Reb Mendel is a mashpia in the yeshiva in Kfar Chabad. Bachrim from all over the world flock to Kfar Chabad to grab the opportunity to learn from Reb Mendel, to sit by his farbrengens. When he comes to New York, when he comes to spend Yom Tif by the Rebbe, whenever anybody hears that Reb Mendel is farbrengen, the place is packed. He had a certain way of conveying his personal life experience, the stories that he heard, the stories that he lived through, adopting them into our own personal battle of the Yetzer Hara in a warm, chassidische, warme, exciting and entertaining way. But in the summers, for almost 20 years, maybe even a little more, Reb Mendel had a different mission. Reb Mendel Futerfas would join up and travel together with the Shadar, Reb Shmuel Dovid Reichik, throughout the United States to raise funds, to raise money for the Yidden that were still stuck behind the Iron Curtain, and also for families that had recently immigrated. Reb Shmuel Dovid Reichik was a very, very special chassid, a very special character, and maybe we'll do an episode or a series on him as well. A very unique personality. When you look at pictures of Reb Shmuel Dovid, or Reb Shmuel Dovid as he was known, long white beard, you see the face of a chassid that wasn't living, as they say, the American dream. He lived with a little more of a higher purpose. But even so, these two Chssidim, Reb Mendel Futerfas and Reb Shmuel Dovid Reichik, were two opposite personalities. They had two different upbringings, and they were Bashat Begashmis, two very different personalities. It's true they both lived through the tzaras of the early 20th century. Reb Shmuel Dovid Reichik had to flee from Poland to Shanghai during World War II. And while Reb Mendel, we heard about all his experiences, was now a mashpia for Bachrim in Eretz Yisrael, what did Reb Shmuel Dovid Reichik do? He was the shliach. He lit up the neshama of thousands of Yidden on the West Coast, which be'emes was laying the groundwork for the mass expansion of Chabad that we have throughout California and Bechlal throughout the West Coast. They would go around together during the summer months. They would raise money. And even though they were two different personalities, they were mamish inseparable. Reb Shmuel Dovid was a more relaxed, easygoing type of person. While Reb Mendel, as we hear from our stories, was very driven, excited, and goal-oriented. Each morning they would wake up, Reb Shmuel Dovid would take his time in learning and talking to people in the community that they were in, and making some phone calls, and then davening bariches. Reb Mendel would also daven bariches, but as soon as he was done davening, he wanted to get the show on the road. He would get, all agitated and say, the day is already half gone. What do we do? What did we accomplish today? We got to get the job done. There's Yidden, we need help. And Reb Shmuel Dovid said, relax, don't worry, we're going to get there. Another one of their differences was that Reb Mendel Futerfas, it bothered him. He couldn't understand why Chssidim living in America needed to have such fancy mebel, such fancy furniture and fancy dishes, decorate their home. They should be living a life which is a little bit more focused on ruchnius. Reb Shmuel Dovid, on the other hand, was a little more tolerant in his approach to such people. Not chas v'shalom that Reb Mendel didn't respect him, but Mendel said, now imagine for a second, you have a Yid which is not yet from. He's driving down the streets of San Diego, and you see this sight. Two elderly Jews with long white beards, and they're walking down the street. They look like mamish. They came straight out of the shtetl and were planted right here on a street in San Diego, California. And that's exactly what happened. People were pushed in shock. They were in awe by the sight of these two Chssidim walking the streets. People pushed stop their car and stare at them. And the Yidden, their interest in Reb Mendel and Reb Shmuel Dovid turned from curiosity to genuine respect. They were awe-inspired by their presence. The biggest highlight when Reb Mendel and Reb Shmuel Dovid Reichik would come to a city, would be a farbrengen. Because besides for the Divrei Torah, besides for the Chsidische Vertlach and the Nugunim that they would sing and share together, Reb Mendel had a special way of saying a story. He was a fantastic storyteller, phenomenal storyteller. He knew when to go loud and when to whisper. He knew when to pause. He knew when to what kind of words to use and how to look at the crowd. Reb Mendel got really involved and would share the stories of his Mesiras Nefesh in Russia. It was a journey for these chevra. They were listening to it. It was a journey to a world that they had never experienced. One time, Reb Mendel Futerfas was visiting Long Beach, California. While he was there, he learned that there was no mikveh in the city. So, during the farbrengen, Reb Mendel Futerfas started speaking to the members of the community. How could this be? How could it be you have a Yiddish community and you don't have a mikveh? How's that possible? You have to build a mikveh. But the reason there was no mikveh was because the Frum administration in the city said, what do we need a mikveh for? There's not that many people that are going to use it anyways. And Los Angeles is not far away. So if someone wants to go to the mikveh, they'll drive a couple of minutes, a half hour, however far it is from Long Beach to Los Angeles, to go to the mikveh there. It's a big expense for a very small amount of people. However, one woman was by the farbrengen. She was so inspired by what she heard, so encouraged by what she heard. She sat down, wrote a whole letter to her mother, exactly what happened by the farbrengen, who Reb Mendel was, what he spoke about. The mother read the letter and then passed it along, forwarded it along to the Rebbe. A short while later, the Rebbe sent a message to Reb Gershon Schusterman. The Rebbe said that building a mikveh in Long Beach is very important. And to make the process go even faster, the Rebbe himself is going to send $1,000 to facilitate the building of a mikveh in Long Beach. How did this come about? Because Reb Mendel Futerfas visited the city and felt the need that there should be a mikveh in the city, when everybody else thought it wasn't important. Rabbi Schusterman comes to the Shmuel Dovid Reichik and says, the Rebbe is giving $1,000 to build a mikveh. But the people in our town don't appreciate the value of a mikveh. It's going to be very difficult to raise the funds. But together with Reb Shmuel Dovid, they raised the funds and built a mikveh. And Kinderlach, if I understand correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, this is still the only mikveh in Long Beach till today, inspired by this farbrengen of Reb Mendel. After a while, instead of Reb Mendel Futerfas having to go around and collect money from people, the people that they would collect money from, that they would go fundraise from, looked forward to these visits. It became an honor to be visited by Reb Mendel. So if a guy gave $1,000 the year before, and now they were looking forward to this visit of Reb Mendel and Shmuel Dovid Reichik, Shmuel Dovid would say, maybe you want to give a little more this year. And they would have a friendly negotiation. It became an honor to be visited by these two great Chssidim. One time, after collecting money for a few days, Reb Mendel and Reb Shmuel Dovid Reichik were so tired. And they went to go meet with some very fancy individual. Maybe he was a lawyer, maybe he was a business executive, I don't know. They came to his office. They come to the front desk. And the secretary says, I apologize, the boss is in a meeting. Why don't you have a seat in the waiting room? He'll be out shortly to see you. Reb Shmuel Dovid and Reb Mendel Futerfas sit down in the waiting room. Nice, comfortable chair. And after running around from one office to another for so long, they were so tired, they just fell asleep. You could imagine the scene. The owner, the big fancy businessman, comes out and sees two elder Chssidim sitting, waiting for a meeting for him, and instead of being prepared to come in and give him all the kavod, they're sleeping in his waiting room. Two Chssidim with lange weiße Bärte, one of them is wearing a casket, and their eyes are closed. They're farbrengen in Mesifta Derakia. They're sleeping away. This scene not only did not disappoint the Balabas, it inspired him so much that when Reb Mendel and Reb Shmuel Dovid Reichik woke up, they found that this individual had written them a $5,000 check. Just from seeing a Shlofta Chassid. But by the time Tafshin Mem came around, by the time the 80s came around, Reb Mendel wrote to the Rebbe saying that he wanted to stop the fundraising. It was already getting too much for him. But the Rebbe said, besides for collecting money that you need to help other Yidden, you visiting these people, the donors, this encourages them and helps them in their Yiddishkeit. Not only that, you're giving them an opportunity to support a Yiddish Maisid, which if it was not for you, they wouldn't support other Yiddish causes. How can you deprive others of the mitzvah of tzedakah? How can you take away this gewaldige opportunity from the Yidden that want to give tzedakah to you because they have a relationship with you because you're tired? Reb Mendel understood and continued his Heilige Arbeit. Something you boys and girls may not know is that Reb Mendel actually had a brother that lived here in the United States as well. Reb Mendel had an older brother, was about 7 years older than him. His name was Reb Mendel. Reb Mendel Lieberman. What? I thought Reb Mendel's last name was Futerfas. Why is his brother's name Lieberman? Well, Kinderlach, like we've mentioned many times before, when the Chssidim were leaving Russia, and B'chlal, when Yidden were leaving Europe during the Second World War, some of them had fake passports, and some of them had real passports that belonged to Polish citizens that had passed away, and they took on the name of that Polish citizen. So you have a family, let's say their name was Goldstein, Lamazagin, and they took the passport of a family whose name was Weiss. When they immigrated, on their papers it said Weiss. I can tell you from my own family personally, my Zayde had one last name and his brother had a different last name. Because my Zayde escaped under a fake passport, actually a real passport that he took on the identity of somebody else. So he kept that person's last name. And my Zayde's brother, who was in a concentration camp, when he left and came to the United States, he had his original family names. He had two brothers with two different last names. Same thing to Mendel Futerfas. He retained his name Futerfas while he was in jail. While Reb Mendel, when he escaped, his passport said Lieberman. So he immigrated under the name Mendel Lieberman, and that's the name he kept for the rest of his life. But they were brothers. Very, very, very close. Reb Mendel Lieberman, because he was 7 years older than his brother Reb Mendel, he actually remembered his father. He had memories of his father playing the violin and drawing pictures. As a matter of fact, both Reb Mendel Futerfas and Reb Mendel Lieberman were both very, very good artists. Reb Mendel, as we spoke earlier, went into the business world. And Mendel pursued art as a profession. He became a professional artist. Unfortunately, during the time while he was pursuing art, while he was learning and studying art, he wasn't spending as much time as Reb Mendel involved in Chassidish Inyanim. He received various different awards and attention for his beautiful artwork. And Reb Mendel became famous for his Askanis Tziburis. But they loved each other deeply, sharing a bond that can only be forged by two people who went through such immense tzaddis together in their youth. The loss of their father, Reb Mendel, the original Reb Mendel, was one of many that Reb Mendel would endure. Reb Mendel didn't have an easy life. He was drafted into the Red Army, where he was injured. And when he came home, he was finally released from the army. He found out that Rachmana litzlan, his wife, Braina, had passed away. As a matter of fact, she was killed by the Germans, together with his two daughters, Bluma and Leah. Reb Mendel Lieberman was so zerbrochen, so sad, so despondent. He felt he had no reason to keep on living. He lost his wife, he lost his children. Was hat er? His brother was now somewhere in Russia and Siberia. What did he have to live for? Reluctantly, he joined his mother and his sisters and their families, and they left Russia. When they arrived in Paris, Handel Lieberman wrote to the Frierdiker Rebbe for advice how exactly he should continue to live his life. The Frierdiker Rebbe told him he should live as an artist. This was a chush that Eibishter gave him, and he should use his expertise to recreate the world as he sees it. The life of a Chassidish Yid has to be harmonious and cohesive in all aspects. And therefore, the Rebbe told him that your art should be used to serve the Eibishter. Reb Handel Lieberman, Reb Mendel's brother, lived in London for about a year and then eventually moved to New York. And he started making pictures. First, his pictures were very sad and very maraschera, very depicted a lot of very scary and sad, depressing scenes. But I believe it was our Rebbe that told him that he has to stop being maraschera. He has to use his art to make happy pictures, simchedike pictures. And slowly, his paintings became more purposeful, reflecting more simcha, more joy, more happiness. But he was still bothered by the fact that his brother, Reb Mendel, was locked away in Siberia. There's a famous painting of Reb Mendel Lieberman that he made depicting what life must be like for his brother, Reb Mendel Futerfas, in Siberia. I'm sure some of you may have seen it. It shows a chassid depicting Reb Mendel standing behind a barbed wire fence in a prison camp with a watchtower in the background. The chassid has his hands stretched out, looking towards the heavens, a sad look on his face, saying, Ratave, Ratave, rescue, rescue, help, while a guard looks on from the watchtower. That's what Reb Mendel thought his brother Reb Mendel Futerfas was living through. But in reality, as we learned, Reb Mendel's deep emunah, bitachon, never permitted him to ever reach such levels of desperation. Finally, Reb Mendel arrived in New York, and for the first time, he stays together with his brother, Reb Handel Lieberman, and they rekindled their old relationship. They would verbring together, they would talk together, and laugh and cry together. Reb Handel's paintings, I'm sure many of them you've seen, a lot of them were used as the covers for the old Nechoyach, Negunim series, the tapes. A lot of the covers were pictures of the paintings of Reb Handel Lieberman. There are pictures of Chssidim dancing, and pictures of a Tish, and pictures of a Fabrengen, pictures of the shtetl. Reb Handel Lieberman passed away in 1976. Shortly after he passed away, the Rebbe told Reb Mendel Futerfas in Yechidus that he should do the Rebbe a personal favor. Of course, a personal favor for the Rebbe. What is that? The Rebbe asked that Reb Mendel Futerfas he gathered together all the paintings from his brother Handel and printed in a book. Go buy a book, a picture book just of the paintings of Reb Handel. And so, Reb Mendel gathered money, and he asked somebody to put it together, and the person started the project, and then the money dried up, and the project stopped. And then, a few years later, he tried again and again, and for some reason, the book just wasn't getting printed. 15 years later, after Reb Mendel passed away, Reb Mendel decided it's time to get the job done. He was upset with himself that he didn't get it done yet. Reb Mendel was getting older. He already wasn't feeling well. And he knew that this was something the Rebbe told him clearly to do. He must get it done. So in the spring of 1995, of Tavshin Hey, almost a year after Gimel Tammuz, Reb Mendel knew he had to finish this Haidah the Rebbe gave him. And in spring of Tavshin Hey, he received the published book of Reb Handel's drawings and paintings. A few weeks later, while in London, visiting his son, Reb Mendel got very sick. And Reb Mendel Futerfas passed away at the age of 88, Dalet Tammuz, Tavshin Nun Hey, exactly 1 year after Gimel Tammuz. I am told that Reb Mendel used to say Rebbe Leishana Chia Minayin, which is actually a term from the Gemara talking about Rebbe as in Rabbi Yehuda, Chia meaning Reb Chia. If Rebbe didn't teach us, so Chia, how do you know? But he would teach it like this. Rebbe Leishana, if you're not by the Rebbe for a year, for a Shana, or some people say for once a year, Chia Minayin, Chia Meloshen Chayis, where do you have your life from? I was told, again, this is Herigish, so take it as you wish, that because Reb Mendel was such a mekusher, there are those that said upon him, Rebbe Leishana, if he didn't experience seeing the Rebbe for a year, being with the Rebbe, in the tangible sense that we had before Gimel Tammuz, Rebbe Leishana, Chia Minayin. Where did he have his keches? Where did he have his life from? The Nekuda is, Chevra, that Reb Mendel Futerfas was not a chassid from 1,000 years ago or from 100 years ago. This is a chassid from the lifetime of our Zaydis, many of our parents, many of our aunts and uncles. This is a chassid that lived in our generation here in Deir Shvi, went through real physical tzaras, understood the challenges of what it's like to live as an Amerikanische Chokoladnike, an American spoiled person, a person that has all these easy luxuries at our disposal. It creates a different type of challenge in Avodas Hashem. But the stories that Reb Mendel taught us, his life experience, shows us that everything that Eibishter gives us, all the challenges, is really just a way that we can learn how to fight the Yetzer Hara and how to serve the Eibishter better.